A flight over the Amazon hits severe weather.
Se cerró todo,
Everything was dark as night.
And ends in disaster.
The first impression that I got, it was the terrible smell of fuel and blood.
The search for answers
We need to take pictures of everything before it's all gone.
faces a unique obstacle.
They were taking anything they could carry.
A crash site scavenged by looters.
Tires, oxygen bottles, doors, parts of the landing gear.
Missing valuable evidence. Investigators will need all their creativity and cunning
Got the calculator?
if they hope to ever discover why TANS Peru Flight 204
113 knots.
fell from the sky. The shattered fuselage of a Boeing 737 lies smoldering in a Peruvian jungle. Stunned passengers struggle to escape the wreckage.
Once I was outside, I tried to help those near the door who knew they had to leave the plane. I pulled them by their hair, by their shirt sleeves, whatever I could get.
The plane has gone down 6 kilometers from the nearest airport. It will take time for rescuers to fight their way through the thick bush. Leaking jet fuel could set off a massive fireball at any moment.
Fires can appear in a very fast way, not leaving passengers with the possibility to escape.
The survivors scramble to get as far away from the plane as they can.
"10 minutes after we left it, the plane exploded.
Scattered wreckage is all that's left of TANS Peru Flight 204. A flight that just an hour ago was preparing to take off from the capital city of Lima.
You'll have to move your seat forward, please.
Carrying 91 passengers, the flight is headed to the river town of Pucallpa and then Iquitos, gateway to the Amazon.
Taking off from Lima to Pucallpa was a beautiful flight. You see the snow caps on top of the mountains, the lakes, the little roads, and then you see how it changes color to the beautiful forest green in the jungle.
Hector Ugarte barely makes the flight. A government bureaucrat. He travels regularly to Pucallpa on business.
There is extra room with receipts down if that helps.
You are too kind.
I always have problems on planes because my legs hit the seat in front of me. So I always want to be in the emergency exit row because there's more room.
Today, a former Air Force major will be handling the takeoff. Gonzalo Delgado is training to become a first officer.
You ready?
His instructor is Octavio Perez Palma.
Go ahead.
A former military commander, he's now an airline captain.
Set first. You're set.
Pilots need to build up experience. An unexperienced pilot would fly sitting in the first officer position together with an experienced first officer sitting on the jump seat.
On this flight, that experienced first officer is Jorge Panta, backup for trainee Delgado.
Positive rate of climb. Gear up. Set climb thrust. Flaps up.
Delgado's takeoff is perfect. The 24-year-old Boeing 737 lifts gently into the sky.
Textbook major. Thank you, sir. You remind me of myself.
In less than an hour, they should arrive in Pucallpa.
Pucallpa Pucallpa is one of those great tourist destinations in Amazonian Peru.
Foreign tourists and local business people rely on Pucallpa's small one-runway airport. It has no weather radar, so the controllers rely on pilots flying in the area to tell them about changing weather conditions.
This is Captain Perez Palma. Weather conditions for the flight are good, but for your safety, I'd appreciate if you could stay in your seats with your seatbelts fastened.
You can sit in the cabin if you prefer.
Cruising at 33,000 feet, the crew contacts the air traffic controller in Pucallpa for landing instructions.
Pucallpa Tower, TANS Peru 204, good
Afternoon. We're at 330, 174 DME. We'll start our descent in 10 minutes. Can you provide conditions, please?
TANS Peru 204, Tower.
Scanner range at 3,000, southern quarter.
Thank you, Pucallpa Tower.
That front's blowing our way.
We'll make it.
Captain Palma is familiar with the fickle weather systems of the Amazon, and he's flown to Pucallpa many times. 85 kilometers from the airport, the plane hits a storm.
I could not understand why we had to fly through such a storm, because there was really a torrential downpour.
In Pucallpa, storm clouds are threatening, but there's still no rain.
TANS Peru 204. Charlie Bravo is in the southern quarter. Again, final descent 1,500 feet.
Pucallpa Tower, TANS Peru 204, thank you. Descending to 1,500.
As Captain Palma sets the autopilot to the new target altitude, another jet arrives at Pucallpa Airport. The crew reports conditions.
Runway 20 looks good so far. Weather's shifting fast. Suggest caution.
Okay.
Look at that beast.
It's huge. It looks like England. We can get in through here.
Let's see. 20 miles.
No, that's too far. Look, here's Pucallpa. Do you see it?
I see it. Maybe through there.
No. We have to go in further ahead.
Now, 40 kilometers, or 25 miles from the runway, the crew has the option of flying to an alternate airport or returning to Lima.
Let's get under it.
Okay. We're not going to our alternate?
But Captain Palma is determined to make it to Pucallpa.
We felt the plane moving from side to side. It was shaking.
Como tembloroso.
We're at 2,000 feet.
Pilots would know the altitude to keep. You would have to go to your minimum descent altitude based on the procedure approved for Pucallpa at that time.
1,500 feet is the minimum descent altitude on this flight. Captain Palma knows he can't go any lower until he can actually see the runway.
Es muy importante que
It's very important at that altitude and that distance that the pilot can see the runway so he can land the plane.
está la vista para realizar su aterrizaje.
Is there some visibility over there?
No, not that way. Stay under the cloud. Do not descend. Do not descend. That's what I'm looking for. There. Right there.
Everything was dark as night, even though it was just 2:45 in the afternoon. It was so dark, it looked like the windows were closed.
Oscuro, como si las ventanas estuvieran cerradas.
Captain Palma can sense his trainee is nervous.
Okay. Keep it up.
Then, a few kilometers from the runway,
Or maybe I have it, okay?
Palma decides to take control of the flight. He turns off the autopilot. Suddenly, Flight 204 hits a massive hailstorm.
Look for the runway. Look for the runway outside. Look. 6 miles.
Captain Palma desperately wants to land. but he's unable to begin his final descent.
El piloto
Until the pilot notifies us that the runway is in sight, we cannot authorize him to land.
de aterrizaje.
Flash 5. Do you have the runway in sight? No, I don't have it.
I saw a flight attendant come running and sit in an empty seat.
We'll be fine.
Then I realized that things were pretty serious.
Tell the tower to confirm visibility on the other side of the runway so they can come around and land.
Until Palma can see the runway, he's stuck at 1,500 feet.
Carpet tower, TANS Perú, cruiser report. What is the visibility on the other side of the runway? TANS Perú 204.
Visibility is getting worse.
Now less than 2.5 kilometers. I can't see it. I can't see anything.
An altitude alarm sounds a grave warning. Inexplicably, the plane has dropped hundreds of feet in just seconds. It is now less than 500 feet from the ground.
Okay, go with me.
The crew has only seconds to somehow avoid disaster.
Help me pull. Help me pull.
TANS Perú 204. TANS Perú 204.
En ese momento lo que estaba yo tomando.
I believe that these were the last few minutes of my life.
Eran mis últimos minutos de vida y mientras pensaba las luces.
And as the lights flicked on and off, I directed myself to God.
De dirigirme a Dios.
TANS Peru Flight 204 has cut a 1.5 kilometer long swath through the jungle, scattering bodies, luggage, and torn pieces of fuselage.
TANS Perú 204. TANS Perú. TANS Perú 204.
Flight 204 has not responded to calls from controller Juan Carlos Peña.
Le da uno en el sentido de que
I had a feeling something bad had happened.
Peña's fears are confirmed when he gets a call from the local fire chief.
Y me informa de que un sobreviviente, amigo suyo,
A friend of his was a passenger who survived the crash,
él venía en ese vuelo y que
and he called him. He said the passengers in the front of the plane were all dead, but there were many survivors in the back.
y que había muchos sobrevivientes de la parte trasera.
A growing cloud of smoke can be seen for miles. Many local villagers rush to help, but some only want to help themselves.
It makes me so mad. You know why? They're like rats. When I went there, I had one thing on my mind. To help. To help these people, not to steal.
Instead of helping people and finding out whether they were alive, whether they were dead, and seeing how they could help, they began to loot.
Survivors are powerless to stop the looting. They can only sit and wait for help.
And then, something incredible happened. A man came out of the trees. It was like a person coming out of a wall.
45 minutes after the crash, rescuers arrive from Pucallpa.
Each minute there was more pain, and the adrenaline was wearing out.
Que la misma adrenalina se me estaba pasando.
Local reporter Gino Marquez is one of the first journalists on the scene.
It was incredible to see suitcases thrown all over the place, clothes that belonged to the passengers. It was my first time covering a plane crash as a journalist, and it affected me deeply.
The rescue effort carries on throughout the night. By morning, the full scope of the disaster becomes clear. Of the 98 people who boarded the plane, 40 are dead, including all 3 pilots. There is no one to explain what happened in the cockpit during the final seconds of Flight 204. This is the 5th fatal crash for TANS Peru in the last 13 years.
TANS Peru was an airline founded by the government in 1962.
The airline has one of the worst safety records in South America. Just 2.5 years earlier, all 46 people aboard another TANS Peru flight died during a failed descent.
They were flying from a city called Chiclayo to another city that is called Chachapoyas. And just like 5 minutes before the landing, they crashed against a hill.
All these facts turned this into a very big story. It attracted a huge amount of public attention. What people wanted were answers. Why did the accident happen?
The day after the crash of Flight 204, a team from Peru's Aviation Accident Investigation Commission arrives. Patrick Frickberg is in charge.
The first impression that I got, it was the terrible smell of fuel and blood. It was still burning 24 hours after it crashed. It amazed us that somebody had survived.
Thanks to my seat change, because I couldn't fit into the seat because of my size, they changed me to row 10, the emergency exit row. And that's why I had a chance to survive.
Frickberg is also amazed by the looting.
They were taking anything they could carry from the wreckage site. They took tires, oxygen bottles, doors, metal pieces, parts of the landing gear. And maybe there was an interest in exchanging them for money.
The small troop of government soldiers at the crash site,
Excuse me, I'm with CIAA. I'm going to need your help, please.
Can't protect all the evidence.
It was huge as well, so it wasn't that easy of a situation to control.
Hey, I need both these engines guarded around the clock. No exceptions.
Frickberg is forced to preserve the most important pieces.
We could distinguish the engines, but everything else was into small pieces.
We need to take pictures of everything before it's all gone. Let's go.
What he can't guard, he tries to document.
I mean, the pieces were there, the flight controls were there, we found the cockpit, parts of the cockpit, we found the seats. We were mainly worried about recovering the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder.
While the team at the crash site searches for the vital black boxes, other investigators interview survivors.
The last thing that I remember was just this fire coming from the front end of the plane.
It sounded like the engines were struggling.
I have never seen hail that big.
The survivor accounts of the flight confirm reports of a severe hailstorm that pounded the region.
It's huge.
Just before Flight 204 went down. Frickberg wonders if the hail somehow disabled the engines.
It can severely damage the whole aircraft and its systems. It can shut down the engines. It's very dangerous for an aircraft to fly into a hailstorm.
Investigators suspect Flight 204 may have been hit by enough hail and moisture to cause what's known as dual-engine flameout.
An engine flameout is almost like a candle being blown by the wind.
A visual inspection of the engines should help determine if that's the case. Though the engine's outer casings have suffered heavy damage, the turbines are largely intact.
We had to see if they sucked in some debris.
A close inspection reveals plant debris deep inside the turbines. It means that the engines were spinning when the plane hit the jungle canopy.
We found that nothing abnormal had happened to the engines. They were operating until they crashed.
It's conclusive evidence. An engine flameout did not bring down Flight 204.
We didn't know at that time what had caused the accident.
Hope of getting some answers is renewed within hours when they find one of the plane's 2 black boxes. Peru lacks the technology to read the data. The voice recorder will be shipped to the NTSB in Washington for analysis.
It's like a rush because, okay, we have something to work with now.
But the second black box, the flight data recorder, is still nowhere to be found.
Any sign of the FDR? Well, I can guess what happened to it. Keep looking.
It's more than likely that looters have taken the FDR.
Watching that some of the evidence was being taken away, we were very, very frustrated that we could not have a better control of the crash site.
With the evidence they need disappearing by the minute, they post a $500 reward for the return of the flight data recorder.
It tells us how the engines were, or the systems were performing until they crashed, until the aircraft crashes. So it's pretty necessary information to have.
Whether they ever get that valuable information is now up to the people of Pucallpa. In the meantime, Frickberg gathers information on what the Pucallpa Tower controller witnessed as he waited for Flight 204's arrival.
Es ahí cuando ya le informo al piloto.
At that point, I informed the pilot of the presence of the cumulonimbus. In the aviation world, everybody knows it is the most dangerous cloud.
Es que es la nube más peligrosa que tenemos.
The controller could only warn the crew about the storm cloud, also known as a Charlie Bravo.
TANS Peru 204. Charlie Bravo in the southern quadrant.
In Peru, controllers do not have the authority to shut down an airport.
Begin final descent to 1,500 feet.
He was advising the crew that the conditions were deteriorating fast.
We can get it from here.
According to his general operations manual, you either avoid that storm or you go around it or over it if possible.
El vuelo visual le dice.
Visual flight rules instruct a pilot in a situation of zero visibility to immediately gain altitude and go to an alternate airport.
Investigators need to know why Captain Palma took the risk of flying straight into the storm.
No, we have to go in further ahead.
He had enough fuel to divert to another airport. They suspect that the unusual origins of TANS Peru have something to do with his decision. Launched by the Peruvian Air Force, the airline fostered a culture that likely came into conflict with the goals of civil aviation.
TANS Peru started as a military operator without any certification from the civil aviation authorities in Peru.
Their personnel were either retired Air Force pilots or in active duty pilots.
Military pilots have a different type of training than civilian pilots. For them, if they have to land, it's an order. They land. The civilian pilot has more leeway to question. He has more freedom.
The military attitude is always to accomplish the mission.
The unavoidable question: did Captain Palma disregard safety and endanger the lives of his passengers in a misguided attempt to finish the mission?
We'll make it.
Looking for more answers, Frickberg travels to Washington, where NTSB specialists can extract the recording from the CVR.
Is there some visibility over there? No, not that way. Stay under the cloud. Do not descend. Do not descend.
I only hear two voices. Perez, Palma, and Chileno Salgado.
This was supposed to be a three-man crew, but there are only two voices on the recording.
Where's the first officer?
Look for the runway. Look for the runway outside.
But before he can answer that question,
6 miles.
Oh. Hi, it's Patrick.
he gets news from his office in Lima.
Call me the second you open it. Tell me what worked when getting the FDR.
It seems that $500 was too good to pass up for one man in Pucallpa. In a major breakthrough for investigators, the man agrees to exchange the second black box for the reward money.
He was pretty much the good guy at the time.
If it's still functioning, the FDR could point directly to the cause of the crash by revealing any in-flight electrical or mechanical failures. Meanwhile, the reason why there are only two voices on the CVR has come to light.
The first officer was in the cabin.
The first officer left the cockpit.
You can sit in the cabin if you prefer.
Because the seatbelt on his jump seat wasn't working.
Aircraft manufacturers have built their airplanes to be flown by a crew of 2 as a minimum.
The crew ignored a key rule requiring the first officer to stay in the cockpit during a training session.
Turn it up.
Frickberg also notices a characteristic sign that trainee Gonzalo Delgado was not comfortable flying the plane.
Based on other accident investigations, when we heard the co-pilot start whistling, and that means that maybe he's in a very stressful situation.
Look for the runway. Look for the runway outside. Looking.
Though the investigation is far from over, it's beginning to look like the pairing of this captain
The speed, you idiot.
with an inexperienced trainee may have been a recipe for disaster.
Do you have the runway in sight?
The CVR from TANS Peru Flight 204
No, I don't have it.
has given investigators a glimpse inside the cockpit of the doomed flight. They hope data from the FDR will tell them much more. But when it is finally examined, those hopes are dashed.
Yeah. It was like a bad surprise for us because it was tampered with, it was opened.
The recorder is badly burned, and whoever found it has toyed with the intricate internal mechanism. The device is useless.
The tape was destroyed, we can use it.
Yeah.
It's a bitter disappointment for investigators.
All right, thank you.
Worse, they're missing some other important data.
En el caso del aeropuerto de Pucallpa,
Pucallpa Airport doesn't have radar. Only Lima Airport does.
en nuestra central en la ciudad de Lima,
A radar track of the flight would show the plane's rate of descent. Information that could tell investigators how quickly the crisis developed. Without the radar data,
Got the calculator?
Frickberg has to get creative. He listens to how the pilots describe their position.
Okay. 20 miles. We are at 2,000 feet.
He hopes to recreate the plane's flight path. It requires detailed analysis.
20 DME. Velocity is 300.
He measures how long it took the plane to travel a given distance to calculate airspeed.
You make mathematical calculations and you obtain the rate of descent.
From the analysis, a telling detail emerges.
Look what happens here.
34 seconds before impact, the plane dropped like a stone, losing 1,000 feet in altitude.
Tenía intenciones de subir, pero se vio de que
It tried to go up, but instead of going up, we saw that the plane began to fall down. And then we went into free fall.
como si el avión ya tuviera una caída libre.
The calculations show that Flight 204's sudden loss of altitude was accompanied by a rapid loss of speed.
113 knots in only 38 seconds?
That's when the hail started.
The sudden drop in altitude and speed coincided with the onset of the hailstorm. Frickberg already knows hail did not cause the 737's engines to flame out. Perhaps the hail caused a different, but equally serious problem. He obtains a high-resolution satellite image of the thundercloud, taken at the time of the crash.
You see in the size of this storm cell, it was established that very big hail hit the aircraft.
Look at the radar reflection right here. This is a hail shaft.
Within a hail shaft, there's a fast-moving column of air known as a downdraft. Flying through one can be risky.
It could either damage the aircraft or it could even push down the aircraft.
In 1985, a Lockheed L-1011 flew through a cumulonimbus cloud while on descent to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. It was hit by a severe downdraft and crashed just short of the runway. A downdraft could explain Flight 204's severe loss of speed and altitude. But experienced pilots like Captain Palma are trained to recognize and combat the effects of a downdraft.
he would push the throttles all the way forward to gain speed he would immediately and automatically would pull the wheel in order for the airplane to gain altitude.
Pulling out the nose of the plane and applying full engine power could have kept the plane out of trouble.
Look for the runway! Look for the runway outside! Looking.
Investigators must now answer two key questions. Why couldn't the pilots recover from the downdraft? And why didn't they notice they were dropping until alarms began to sound?
They had no idea they were descending. This is a big mistake. That's why normally crews come in a set of two. So one looks at the flight instruments and the other one is aware of what is going on outside the aircraft.
Delgado's inexperience could account for why he didn't notice that the plane was dropping fast. But Captain Palma was a highly experienced fighter pilot.
He was a captain who had logged a lot of flight hours, an efficient soldier, even a war hero. He fought an air battle with a neighboring country and was given a medal.
Palma knew this route. He was used to flying in unpredictable weather. It doesn't seem to add up. Then, while examining photos he took at the crash site, Frickberg discovers a clue. Patrick Frickberg notices that a section of Flight 204's windshield is unusually frosted and opaque. He asks the NTSB to send him photos of other planes that were damaged by hail.
Hi, it's Patrick. Statistically, there are a couple of serious incidents and accidents where hail has been involved.
Cockpit windows are made of multiple layers of acrylic and plastic bonded together. They are extremely thick and strong, but in rare cases, large hail can crack the outer layers of the windshield, creating a frosted texture that is almost impossible to see through. Investigators conclude that moments before the crash,
Look for the runway! Look for the runway outside!
the crew was flying blind.
The hail shaft shatters the front windows of the aircraft, so the crew lost the visual line of sight of the runway.
Do you have the runway in sight?
Consumed by the damaged window,
No, I don't have it.
the crew failed to notice what their flight instruments were telling them. The plane was falling fast, pushed by a downdraft. Once they hit 500 feet, they couldn't help but notice. The sound of the altitude alert warning began filling the cockpit. Commercial jetliners are equipped with a ground proximity radar system. It triggers a warning if the plane flies too low without deploying its landing gear.
Pull with me! Fall!
It's clear from the Flight 204 CVR that the pilots were trying to pull up, yet the plane didn't climb. The question is why.
We asked the National Transportation Safety Board if they could do a background sound analysis so we could establish if the engines were at max power or not.
Look for the runway!
One by one, the various sounds in the cockpit are identified and eliminated.
That's only the engines, right?
If the pilots were trying to climb, the engines should be screaming as they rev up, but that's not what investigators hear.
They're not spooling up. You just hear constant frequency until the end.
It seems the crew failed to do the one thing that could have saved the plane. Perform a standard procedure. Accelerate out of trouble. Frickberg needs to know how they could have made such a fundamental error. He reviews the events leading up to the crash. A perfect storm of unlikely events and tragic mistakes. It starts
You can sit in the cabin if you prefer.
with the broken seatbelt on the first officer's jump seat. The captain is left flying with only a young, inexperienced trainee.
Textbook major. Thank you, sir. You remind me of myself. Look at that beast.
Captain Palma misjudges the storm
We can get in through here.
and flies right through it. Intense hail shatters the windshield,
Do you have the runway in sight?
blinding the crew.
No, I don't have it.
When a massive downdraft hits, the pilots don't notice their plane is descending until the ground proximity alarm goes off. Then they make the biggest mistake of all. They fail to throttle up. Investigators conclude that happened as the result of one critical decision made moments earlier by Captain Palma.
It sealed their fate.
Okay. Keep it up.
Investigators analyze a pivotal decision made by the captain of Flight 204 less than a minute before the crash.
At the last moment, he took control.
When he began to lose confidence in his co-pilot,
Or maybe I had it, okay?
he took command and became the pilot flying the plane. At that moment, Delgado became first officer.
You're done? Not yet.
The pilots have switched roles.
Look at the speed, you idiot!
Both seem confused by the transition.
Hurry with the flaps!
It's now Delgado's job to monitor the changes in altitude,
Flaps 5! Okay, flaps 5.
but he's distracted by the demands of his captain.
Never both pilots are looking outside at the same time. Never. Always one of the pilots must keep close contact with the instruments.
I can't see it! I can't see anything! Put it! Okay? Pull with me!
Though both pilots were pulling back, they both likely assumed the other one would take the crucial second step needed to get out of trouble, pushing the throttles forward to maximum thrust.
When pilots are too confident and self-sufficient, they get used to the idea that nothing will happen.
We'll make it.
Call it lack of discipline or not obeying the rules, but that's what happened.
When investigators examine the TANS Peru accident that occurred 2.5 years earlier, they discover a shocking fact.
The recommendations from the accident in Chachapoyas were not implemented, and the result was the same type of accident in Pucallpa.
TANS Peru Flight 222 to Chachapoya also crashed on approach for many of the same reasons, especially the failure to follow visual flight rules.
These rules were violated in both cases and caused 2 tragic air crashes.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
But before investigators can finish their work,
The company had another serious incident. They almost had a mid-air collision with a commercial airline.
the Peruvian government steps in to close down TANS Peru Airline. Less than a year after the crash, authorities release the official report. The major cause of the accident, pilot error.
Let's get under it. It was the loss of situational awareness. We're not going to our alternate. The violation of their procedures caused this accident.
Flying into a storm, flying without a qualified first officer in the cockpit, failing to react properly to an emergency, all are significant errors.
We should never forget that training is the only guarantee for pilots to do the right thing. Preparation must include an attitude, a culture, a safety culture that they need to very deeply understand and keep in their heads.